What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with another best ball stream on Underdog Fantasy here on Wednesday, August 16th. I'm going to be drafting another Best Ball Mania 4 team this evening. And big news, definitely shaping a little bit of movement on the ADP boards. We have Ezekiel Elliott joining the New England Patriots, Dalvin Cook joining the New York Jets. A little bit of news from training camps today. We have Jonathan Taylor being excused from Colts camp for personal reasons. Bucs wide receiver Russell Gage going down with a season-ending knee injury. All sorts of things coming in fast and furious here in the middle of the summer. We're still 3 weeks out from the kickoff of week 1 on September 7th between the Chiefs and the Lions, but a lot of these things here are going to start moving ADP, particularly at the bottom of the draft board. So still waiting for this to fill here. It's a good time to take a look at the Best Ball Mania ADP tracker that we have here on the website for you. And this updates once a day, 10 o'clock in the morning, and looks at the biggest shift in the trailing 7 days in ADP changes. Kind of interesting. Kareem Hunt, still a free agent at this point, has the biggest movement, up almost 2.5 rounds by ADP. Still looking for a home. Has had some workouts. We will see where Mr. Hunt lands. Tank Dell, Nathaniel Dell, according to the government, if you will. Dell here has the biggest rise of 25 spots, a little over 2 rounds after his big week 1 preseason game against the Patriots. We got a pair of tight ends in Luke Musgrave from the Green Bay Packers and Jake Ferguson from the Dallas Cowboys, who should be the primary receiving tight ends in each of their offenses. So they've been very popular 16th, 17th, 18th round picks all spring and summer long. Now going around the 16th round here. Kenny Gainwell with the Eagles, a lot of news there. Khalil Herbert with the Bears took all of the snaps with the starters in week 1 with Justin Fields and the Bears. So plenty of things here at the bottom of the board shifting around that we will keep an eye on as things march on here through the rest of the spring and summer. I have been running extremely hot with early picks. I have the number 1 pick here tonight. And honestly, that means that my draft decision here at pick number 1 is made for me. I'm going to go ahead and take Justin Jefferson and just wait for the board to come back to me and see what is there. Kind of interesting. No badge users in this particular draft this evening. So hopefully I get not too weird of a draft room. Hopefully things follow a cadence that is somewhat predictable and allows me to plan out the roster that I want based off of correlations, playoff matchups here. So we'll keep an eye on that as things move on as well. But Justin Jefferson, come on down. We go over to the Stack Seeker on OccupyFantasy.com, another tool similar to the ADP tracker, where this will allow me to actually filter for Justin Jefferson's Vikings. We see that these are all the teammates that we can stack with him to build out a Viking stack here for the rest of this draft. We see the Vikings have the Cincinnati Bengals, Detroit Lions, and Green Bay Packers in the fantasy playoffs this season. If you're a first-time viewer of the show, why are we so focused on this, particularly Week 17? The vast majority of the payout money is paid out in Week 17, so we have to assume that we're going to be there in the finals and hope that when we get there, we have a well-correlated lineup to compete for the $3 million first-place prize here in Best Ball Mania 4 in 2023. But I actually like to look at the opponents for these other correlations here as well to see if I can start to figure out a nice spider web of opponents with lots of correlation in every single round that fit my roster. So if we want to stack with Jefferson, we want to look at the Detroit Lions, we want to look at the Green Bay Packers, and we want to look at the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the most straightforward thing to consider in round 2 when this board comes back to me, believe it or not, is a pairing with the Cincinnati Bengals. T. Higgins should be there at the 2-3 turn. Jahmyr Gibbs from the Lions as a running back, be a little bit of a reach, but he may be there as well. The other thing that is here for you to consider, which I admittedly am starting to employ a little bit more in my portfolio because I have a little bit of Jefferson already, is to stack differently. Draft what the best players are available at the 2-3 turn and just have Jefferson on that roster as well. I do think it's fine to stack Jefferson and the Vikings when you land him, but if you want to be a little bit different, have Jefferson as your number 1 pick, your best receiver, and then just consider a stack with some lower round players that fall to you on the board here. So let's check out how things are going. And it looks like a relatively normal first round so far here. Not super concerned about any of these picks here. Thing that I think is interesting is Cooper Kupp falling a little bit to the middle of the first round just because of the soft tissue injury that he is experiencing. Reviewing my exposures, this is my 60th team so far in this contest. And I can tell you, looking at players going here early, I actually have not been able to draft Nick Chubb just yet on any of my teams. I like Chubb this season, but I have actually had quite a few picks in the front of the draft. This is my exposures thus far, and all the way to the right here on this spreadsheet are the different draft slots and how many times I've picked from each slot. So this is now my 5th pick from the number 1 position, and I'm heavily weighted towards picks in the first 5 spots on these 60 teams thus far. Have not been getting the 11 and 12 pick as much. Chubb's ADP has been hovering around that end of the first round, early second round range for about a month now. And that's probably why I don't have as much of him, because he's not usually there. I'm not taking him early in the first round, and he's not making it back to me in round 2. So something I'm thinking about as we continue to move here is that I want to figure out a way to get a little bit more any Nick Chubb on some of my teams here, because I just feel like that is one player I will feel pretty badly about not having at least a little bit of on my teams this season. So we're a couple of spots away here. And Jonathan Taylor falling on that news I mentioned off the top of the show. I don't think I want to go that direction here. I do like going wide receiver heavy early. One of my highest exposed wide receivers is Chris Olave from the New Orleans Saints. I would expect him to go, but maybe not. We got one more pick to go. No pun intended with the rhyme there. Chris Olave may be a direction that JR 111-318 would like to go. So no Olave on the roster this time. I think I'm going to go with a really different direction than I normally go here. And I think I got Justin Jefferson on my roster. I think there's a pretty good chance he can be the number 1 scoring wide receiver this season. Obviously, the field agrees the way that they are drafting him. Number 1 overall. I'd like the odds of being able to get the number 1 scorer at every position, putting me in a good position to compete throughout the rest of the fantasy season. So one way to do that here is to go with Josh Allen at quarterback and Mark Andrews at tight end, because I do think all 3 of these players have a chance to be the number 1 scorer at their position. I'm okay with waiting until potentially round 7 or 8 to take my first running back. So I'm okay with reaching for Mark Andrews here a little bit ahead of his ADP and being done with tight end until the end of this contest. A little more interested in having elite tight ends on my roster, so fine with going that direction here this evening. So now we have much more interesting options, I think, available to us throughout the rest of this contest. And one thing I am interested in doing a little bit more here through the rest of the draft season is looking at some of these interesting combinations of players with conflicting bye weeks. I do think everyone's initial reaction is to really scream, be like, what are you doing? You're piling up these week 13 buys, Allen, Jefferson, and Andrews all with the same bye week. So if I want to stack any of these 3 offenses, I'm putting myself in a position where at quarterback or tight end, if I have duplicate week 13 buys, I probably want to add a 3rd player at that position. I'm willing, even at the more so at the tight end position and quarterback, to actually have conflicting buys there and give up those 6 to 7 fantasy points on average that like a round 16, 17, 18 tight end would probably score in that bye week to replace that production. I think it gives you a little bit more unique roster that people aren't necessarily putting together on the outset. And you get these combinations of some really interesting offenses that should be good this season that people aren't necessarily combining with Buffalo, Minnesota, and Baltimore as the example here on this particular team. So just a little bit of insight into why I am building that kind of strange start here rather than just straight up correlating with Justin Jefferson to at least begin this draft contest. Wide receivers tend to go fast and furious here on Underdog. If you have not been drafting on Underdog, you should consider doing that. We have a promo code on the bottom of the screen that you can use to sign up today and get a 100% match on your first deposit up to $100. So you can start playing with $200 now in these contests. Build some pick 'em slip entries for preseason football. We will have some preseason content coming out the rest of this week because there is 5 days in a row of football this weekend that Brian and the team will be covering for you. So that's definitely exciting stuff coming up here on the channel as well. More on that at the end of today's show, though. We're going to focus on talking about this draft for the rest of the 30 or so minutes we will be together here. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. I would be happy to talk about anything anyone watching wants to discuss this hour. Brian is under the weather this evening. That's why we are flying solo for this draft. Just in case anyone was wondering what is happening with that here. I really like MMA Guru's start here. I feel like I've been in a lot of rooms with MMA Guru every time I enter a draft on this particular platform. But the 3 wide receivers in a row after going with Hero, RB, Austin Eckler in round 1, that's definitely a draft strategy that is after my own heart here. I do think makes a ton of sense to go very wide receiver heavy in the first portion of these drafts, especially. I was curious to see where Brees was going to fall. Brees going in the 4th round now with Dalvin Cook being in that backfield. Dalvin with an ADP of 93. I think he's going to go a little higher than that, though, in this contest at some point. So we'll see how that shakes out. Report has already come out that the Jets plan to feature Dalvin pretty heavily at the beginning of the season and let Brees Hall fully recover from his knee surgery, maybe ramp Brees up a little bit more heavily, in October, November as the season reaches its apex for the Jets this season. Unfortunately, one of my favorite picks in the 4th round, Terry McLaurin, will not be joining the team this evening. Where can we go for some correlation? The Jacksonville Jaguars and the 49ers and the Dolphins are options with Mark Andrews. The Patriots, Chargers, and Cowboys are options with Josh Allen. I do think I am interested in Ayuk and Christian Kirk would be an interesting option to me if I wanted to go with the Jaguars route. I don't necessarily want another quarterback early. I don't need TJ Hawkinson early at tight end because I already went with Mark Andrews. So even though I'm a little hesitant on Kirk, he didn't necessarily play in all of the 2 wide receiver set snaps with Trevor Lawrence in the first preseason game. It's a little bit of a red flag. I think I'm going to go with Christian Kirk here just to build out my wide receiver core, and I have some nice correlation now with Andrews in each of the playoff weeks, especially if I'm able to find a Dolphin in week 17. So these wide receiver options tend to get pretty thin pretty quickly, and given that I'm at a turn pick here and I have to wait 23 picks until I'm back on the board, I'm happy to have 3 starting wide receivers here that I feel will be productive throughout the season. Joe Burrow slipping a little bit to the back end of the turn here at 4-5. I like that a lot for the owner picking right next to me here to get a little bit of value in Burrow around 5, Higgins around 3, Chase in the 1st round. Admittedly, I probably enabled that a little bit by punting on Higgins here in round 3. TJ Hawkinson, just getting caught up on the picks here so I can stay on top of where players are going. I'm willing to reach a little bit, but not at this point in the draft. I think that the top 100 or so picks are pretty reasonably sharp, so I'm not trying to get too crazy in this range, but there are players that I am pretty heavy on in this range. We have the best wide receivers available: Deontay Johnson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Godwin, Tyler Lockett, Marquise Brown. Looking at my wide receiver exposures in this range, I have a ton of Chris Godwin. I have a lot of Terry McLaurin, who goes the round before. Mike Evans, very big on the Buccaneers wide receivers this year. I do think they're in line to have a much better season than the ADP here reflects. So that's the bottom line of why I'm in on those players here in 2023. Okay. What QBs, if any, would you feel drafting with an RB1? Thank you for the question, John. As far as like stacking a running back with a quarterback, I immediately go to the guys that I feel like are going to catch a lot of passes from their quarterbacks. So even though it's one of the more expensive ones on the board, probably Eckler and Justin Herbert. I think that's a decent stack if you can get it. Eckler in the first round, Herbert in the fifth round. Let's see here. Let's go through all of the options. I don't really think that there is anything wrong with stacking McKinnon with Mahomes, but I just feel like that'll be very popular in general. I'm okay with Josh Allen and James Cook because I think you're going to get a lot of production from that offense by doing that. But probably Herbert and Eckler are the best pairing. Dak and Tony Pollard, I guess, would be the other one. Pollard in round 2, Dak round pick 100. I think that's got some potential as well with some targets to the running back in those two offenses. Those are probably the best ones as far as quarterbacks, running backs that go near the top of the board anyway. I hope that answers your question, John. Thank you for dropping in, watching the show, and asking a question. All right, and we've actually got a little bit of a non-wide receiver run here with some running backs and tight ends mixed in, kind of like that, because I think some of these players falling are guys that I'm very, very interested in. Kind of interesting when you get on one of the ends of the draft board like this. There are just some builds that no longer remain viable for you. A lot of players that I have taken in this contest, so far, that I have a lot of exposure to, guys like Brown and Godwin, Deontay Johnson, I actually have a decent amount of. I'm not getting to those guys unless I'm picking in this 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th range. So your strategy is going to change based off of where you land in that randomizer lottery. So we put out some videos early in the draft season, I believe back in June. There's a playlist linked on the homepage channel here on YouTube for Occupy, where we go through the best way to attack drafting from the number 1, number 2, 3 through 12 positions, depending on the pick you get. So some of the takes on there probably are a little off by ADP now because things have shifted a little bit. But I went through and I gave you a look at the Stack Seeker, the ADP trends at that time, and tried to build rosters the way that I thought made sense at the time from each pick slot. So I highly encourage checking that out if you have broad strategy questions. I get the number 1 pick here tonight, but maybe you sit down to do one of your handful of drafts and you have the number 7 pick and you want to know what to do. Well, good news is we've already put some of that content out there and told you what we think makes sense in that particular draft position. It's coming back around to me. I don't have my I shouldn't say starting, my first running back just yet. So it is something I'm actively thinking about. And Cam Akers was the player that I was considering. In this range, J.K. Dobbins is actually a running back that I have 0% of. One of the highest ranked players at any position in the contest that I'm not interested in at cost. I don't think he's going to burn me if I have none of him. So I am okay on passing on J.K. Dobbins this year. Running back that I'm not okay on passing on, though, is Javonte Williams. I do think he's going to lead the Broncos in touches in this backfield. He's a relatively dynamic running back, and we get him at a round 6-7 price tag. I'm more than okay with taking him here. I like Michael Pittman quite a bit as well because I think he should be the target leader for Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts. There isn't going to be as much passing volume here because of Richardson's skill set, and there isn't going to be as much efficiency because Richardson is a rookie, and just in general, this has been discussed ad nauseum in the industry. Rookie quarterbacks far less efficient than their veteran peers, but I'm willing to take the discount on Pittman now in the 7th round as a wide receiver 1 with spike week upside. Hopefully by the second half of the season, Richardson is more efficient, Pittman's still healthy, and I get a nice spike week from Michael Pittman in the fantasy playoffs in a really good game environment in week 17, especially because the Colts are going to be playing in a dome against the Raiders that week. So that opens up an opportunity for me to consider some mini correlation on this roster with Michael Pittman potentially at some point in the next few rounds. So Javonte Williams, Michael Pittman at the turn here. And I have not gotten a stack partner for Josh Allen because I wanted Gabriel Davis to fall to me. It was a little bit of a pipe dream that was going to happen because his ADP is here in the low 60s as well. So I'm going to have to get creative with how I want to go about doing that here in this contest. I may have tipped the strategy at the top of the show for you, by the way. So Michael Pittman Jr. We have some options now with both the Bills and the Denver Broncos have correlations with the Los Angeles Chargers. So if there are any remaining Chargers late that I want to add, it's a tight end that fits that bill, I could get them in there and have some interesting correlation options. By virtue of having Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk, Michael Pittman, and Justin Jefferson. My quarterback pairings for a second quarterback are Kirk Cousins, Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence is gone, Russell Wilson, and Anthony Richardson if he's still available. So that's also something I can consider here in the next few rounds. But I'm at a point where we've got through the first 7 rounds. I have 4 wide receivers that I think have at least the opportunity to be the best wide receivers on their team, maybe top 20 wide receivers are better. I feel good about that group. I will continue to add to it, though, as we go through the rest of the draft here. Once again, a little bit of a running back run here on the 7th round slots here for these owners. I love seeing stuff like this because I'm fine with the players that will come back to me here. Might not expect me to say that, being light at running back, but I will be going hard after the running backs that will be available in the second half of this contest because I think the opportunity cost in the early part of a draft is just too high to pass on these wide receivers. The wide receivers that you get in the second half of the draft contest are just significantly worse. And so I want to stack as many wide receivers as possible into every single fantasy lineup I'm building for Best Ball Mania 4. This is not like your traditional redraft start-sit strategy where you have to agonize over which wide receivers, which players are the best ones to start every single week. I just want players that I know are going to have opportunities to produce, and I know that I'm automatically going to be granted the ability to start the best ones on my roster. So it allows you to build a little differently, jam a lot of players that have tremendous upside onto the same team. Isn't something you would necessarily do in a managed league because especially some of these gross running back rooms that I am prone to put together, you would definitely feel disgusted with yourself trying to make these start-sit decisions with some of these backup running backs, particularly at the beginning of NFL seasons. So, all right. Deshaun Watson, the last pick here that just went off. And where are we at running back? The best one left is Antonio Gibson. Keeping my eye on that as it gets closer and closer to my next opportunity to select a player here. Quentin Johnston is another player that I have no draft exposure to just yet. I don't think that's correct. I think I probably want to get a little bit more. QJ had a very good debut in preseason week 1. Definitely his welcome to the NFL moment, getting him some playing time there in that situation. So I think he'll actually have a really good chance to leap ahead of Joshua Palmer, if not right away, at some point in the 2023 season here as things get rolling for the Chargers. Anyone else that has been hanging around or just popping in, see what's going on. If you have any questions, please feel free. Traylon Burks going right on ADP after suffering a knee injury today. He's going to miss a little bit of time. I would be surprised to see him before October, honestly. Seems like they're saying 6 weeks, and there's that ambiguous, do they mean 6 weeks from right now or 6 weeks from when the season is starting? So just something to think about there. 96, 97, I believe is where I'm picking here. A.J. Dillon, it has correlation with Justin Jefferson. So at least get mini correlation in week 17 there. And then I am going to actually double up on elite quarterbacks. I don't normally do this. This is probably not the greatest, the highest upside strategy given some of the other positions that I need to draft. But I love being able to have Anthony Richardson on my team whenever I can get him. I have one of his high upside teammates paired with him, and I think I'm done drafting Colts players with those two here. And I think part of the reason I was interested in that in this spot is because my high upside Josh Allen pairings, really Gabe Davis, kind of is the best one remaining when you don't get Steph Diggs. I'm a little less excited about finding those touchdown correlation pairings with Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, secondary wide receivers like Trent Sherfield, Khalil Shakir. So having another high upside stack and maybe being a little bit more unique where if I get a spike week out of that stack, but Josh Allen still outscores Anthony Richardson, I might have a little bit more unique lineup week to week in this contest especially in the fantasy playoffs. So not the most traditional build here, two quarterbacks in the first 9 rounds, but I am okay with it under the circumstances. I'm trying to find another high upside pairing here, and I do think there's some opportunity with the Raiders on the other side in Week 17 with the Colts that I can now land on, that I will feel good about in the now officially second half of this contest. We are in the 10th round, 10th out of 18, so we shall see how things go from here. Okay. Zach Charbonnet back in practice for the Seattle Seahawks. Saw his price dropped to around 120 ADP wise when he wasn't practicing. We get the vague updates from Pete Carroll on what was going on with his status, but right back to where we thought he would be. What else can I discuss with you this evening? I will go back to my exposures tab here, and wide receivers. A lot of these guys are still going to be available at this point in the contest. Tyler Boyd is actually my highest exposed player in this entire contest at 31%. Mike Evans, Juju Smith-Schuster, Nicole Hardman, super late. I think he's going to be the starting slot receiver for Aaron Rodgers, so I like the opportunity there. Already told you I was high on the Bucs, so Godwin's up here as well. Sutton with the Broncos, Romeo Doubs with the Packers, Terry McLaurin in the 4th round, player I was hoping to get tonight. The next player I'm hoping to get here. These are some of my guys, right? These are the guys that I tend to select when they're still on the board at their ADPs. Drafted enough teams where I've started to identify, okay, this is definitely where my projections push me towards, my builds correlation-wise push me towards. So as we go through the rest of this contest, I'm actually looking to see if there are any of the guys here at the lower end of my exposure table that maybe I want to have a little bit more of. So that's just something I'm thinking about as I continue to build the rest of my teams this summer. Just getting caught up on the selection thing. That's why I was rambling there a little bit. And once again, I am going to be faced with a decision on my highest exposed player. Thankfully, I've been rescued from adding to that total here. We got a 1, 3, 2, 2, 4, 1 cooking here. Excuse me. And as Brian Robinson comes off the board, 120, 121 is the spot we are in. The wide receiver that makes sense here for me to consider, already mentioned him, correlates with the Colts in championship week. It's Jacoby Myers with the Las Vegas Raiders. So we will be selecting him here. And now I got 5 wide receivers through the first 10 rounds of the contest. There are significant reasons to expect Jamal Williams to have a huge role to start the season with the New Orleans Saints. Number one, Alvin Kamara is suspended for the first 3 weeks. Rookie Kendre Miller has a tweaked knee situation going on. That could be fine by week 1, but it's enough to give me concern. There's a lot of unproven depth behind Kendre Miller on the Saints roster at running back. So Jamal Williams is definitely going to have an opportunity to shine here at the beginning of the 2023 season. If he does well with that opportunity, maybe he will earn a really, really strong role even after Kamara returns. So I'm happy to have him as my RB3 on this team. And I think I would have doubled up on week 13 buys at tight end with Dalton Kincaid here if he had not gone a couple of picks before me on that spot. So, but pivoting to another decent running back with Jamal Williams, AJ Dillon, these guys kind of in those ambiguous running back room situations that I think people start to get scared of. But I would prefer to think of these situations as situations with immense upside. And if anything happens to their backfield mates, already kind of seeing this play out with Jamal Williams in New Orleans, these guys have the opportunity to not just outperform their ADP, but outperform by so much that they actually give you a really decent leg up on your 11 opponents in your 12-man pool that you're drafting for here in each and every contest you put together. So that's kind of how I think about these things a little bit as we move through contests. Think about the macro level trends with teams. All right. So what do we have coming up for you here? The biggest thing to be aware of is that tomorrow we have first game of the preseason week 2 slate. We have the Browns and the Eagles facing one another on Thursday night football. Get excited for that. And I'll give you a little preview of what we're going to be bringing to you tomorrow afternoon on the website. We take a look at every single practice report that we can find for every single team in the preseason. And our entire NFL staff really puts a ton of time into digesting that, figuring out based off of trends, usage, news that we're getting, which players are going to be the best ones to deploy in your DFS lineups, in your pick'em slips through Underdog, because they have a lot of great higher, lower stats they put out for you to consider if you want to build some fantasy lineups for preseason. One thing that everyone is going to know tomorrow, so I don't feel too tremendously guilty about leaking this a little early for you from our daily plug that will be posted tomorrow afternoon. The Browns are only going to be playing 2 quarterbacks tomorrow. So they have 4 on the roster: Deshaun Watson, Joshua Dobbs, Kellen Mond, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. But we know that the Browns are going to only play DTR and Kellen Mond. DTR is going to start. Those guys are going to each play one half of football tomorrow night. So one thing that you can hone in on if you're playing some preseason fantasy football contests tomorrow night is there are only going to be 2 quarterbacks playing for the Cleveland Browns. That's very high floor upside production from each of them, Kellen Mond and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Thompson-Robinson was a draft pick for the Browns this past spring. He's looked pretty good in the 2 games that he has played thus far. I think that they're really considering him versus Kellen Mond if they want to keep 3 quarterbacks. And I think he's a lot more likely to be the one that is kept if he continues to play well throughout the rest of the preseason. So that's something that I will be paying a little bit of attention to tomorrow night personally. More on that in a minute here. We are going to be on the clock very quickly here. So I'm going to take a look at what is left for me to sort through here at pick 144. A little bit of a run on the tight ends has been brewing. Greg Dulcich did not play top tight end snaps for Denver in preseason week 1. Adam Troutman did. So that's kind of interesting for late round tight ends in these contests, because Adam Troutman, I believe, is still virtually undrafted. Him here. Troutman is going 216th. So you want a starting tight end late, you have him as an option. I kind of can't believe Michael Gallup is still here. I pretty much happily draft Michael Gallup every single time he falls behind ADP. So I will add him to the team. And then running back 4. I mean, we got an article out of The Athletic today from beat writers who cover the Falcons. They're projecting Tyler Algier for 170 touches in this backfield. That's not tremendously less than what he saw last year. He had 210 touches, and that was without Bijan Robinson present. So if Algier is going to have anything remotely close to 170 touches in this offense, with Bijan healthy, at a round 13 cost of pick 145, I will gladly gobble that up. And we have immense upside with a running back like Tyler Algier if anything happens to Bijan Robinson. Obviously, we don't want anything to happen to Bijan Robinson, but these are the kind of low risk, high reward decisions I think you need to make in the second half of the fantasy football draft with your running backs, especially. You're not going to get that tremendous bump in production out of any other position that's available to you if a role changes due to a player being injured. Running backs will go from having 5 to 6 touches a game to having 15 to 20 to potentially more when they're replacing production ahead of them on the depth chart. A top wide receiver goes down, top tight end goes down. Those targets are reallocated somewhat evenly in the offense to other guys that play existing positions, and yes, guys who come up and run more routes out of the injured player's spot on the field. So I've always kind of thought about that with my running backs, especially late in contests. They have much more upside for more touches if there's a change midseason than players at other positions. So that's why I'm much more likely to pile these running backs in the later half of contests onto my fantasy football rosters. Okay. That is enough on that soapbox. Mentions the drop-off at wide receiver feeling pretty disgusting. I mean, we're in the 13th round. Our best options are guys like Marvin Mims, Jonathan Mingo, unproven commodities playing in their first seasons in the league on offenses that didn't necessarily have the best results in 2022. Lots of uncertainty there, and that is what gives me pause about drafting a lot of these guys fast and furiously when we get to this portion of a contest. Okay. One of the best running backs still available is probably not going to make it back to me. Kenny Gainwell is one of my highest exposed running backs with the Eagles, comes off the board right after Ezekiel Elliott, who this is a rising price. I don't think water has found its level yet with the Patriots backfield. I have Elliott ranked right around the like David Montgomery tier of running back this year. I think that upside is definitely there, but I'm not sure I'm going to reach for that price. I want to see where his price normalizes. I've already got about 9% Elliott on my rosters, so he's not a player I'm actively seeking to add at this point because I got him at such a better price than this for the majority of the summer. So just kind of keeping an eye on where he goes and seeing how the market is now valuing him. And it's kind of interesting to see him go here in the 13th round. I think there's potential he'll go much higher than that once we kind of get a better sense for his conditioning and how the Patriots plan to use him. Don't want to suggest he's going to be overdrafted. I think he'll be appropriately drafted. He has touchdown upside. Ramondre Stevenson struggled in short yardage situations near the goal line last season, so can definitely see that being the real primary reason the Patriots brought him in, and that is why fantasy players like MMA Guru are interested in adding Ezekiel Elliott here at a little bit of a higher cost than he has had to this point. I believe his ADP, looking at the last poll, is 157.9. This is about 20 spots higher than it was before the news that he was signing with the New England Patriots. All right. We're running out of draft picks, and the one thing that I definitely need to be mindful of is that I have to fill out the tight end position. Mark Andrews, more than okay with having him. Normally would be more than okay with having just 2 tight ends, but I may make a decision here that forces me to have to add a third. So that is what is coming down the pike here on this particular build that I'm working on at this moment. Just keeping an eye on what's still left at these positions, top players to select, making sure I am synced up with how I'm tracking this on my ends. All right. Juwan Johnson's seen a little bit of a dip at tight end. I do think he's one of the better ones late. Seems to have a good rapport with Derek Carr. A lot of concerns with Taysom Hill. A lot of concerns with Boston Moreau. Also, previously of the Raiders joining the New Orleans Saints. But I've taken him quite a bit in these drafts. And just another player as we get late in the contest here that I'm interested in considering when I still need a tight end. But given the fact that I took his quarterback, the player that I want here, even though it's a little aggressive, not tremendously aggressive, but a little aggressive, Dawson Knox with a pick 181 ADP, not likely to make it back to me in 16th, 17th round, because that's after his ADP. But now I at least have some correlation with Josh Allen. So I'm not drawing like completely dead there with just a solo Josh Allen on my roster. And then how about another? Really, I don't know what I want to do here. And this is the interesting thing about being on the clock like this. I'm fine with going for home runs with the Miami Dolphins backfield. I mentioned that once I selected Andrews, I was looking at some of the correlations with Buffalo, Miami, big correlation in championship week. I now have 3 different skinny stacks with Mark Andrews in the fantasy playoffs with Jeff Wilson. Do you think there will be a rotation there for Miami, and each of these guys will have their chance to shine? Jeff Wilson being the cheapest of the 3, Devin Achane, Raheem Mostert, and Jeff Wilson. I'm okay with getting Wilson here at this price. Not a problem for me whatsoever. And I think I definitely have a choice now. Do I want to leave this here, Andrews and Knox, and take that 0 with the 3rd tight end and continue to add high upside receivers and running backs on this roster? It's certainly on the table because I'm looking at the projections of what's left at tight end. And while these guys have higher median outcomes than a lot of the receivers and running backs that are available, their ceilings probably aren't as high. They're probably going to be a dead spot for those other 16 weeks that I'm drafting for. So I'm only worried about week 13 with this 3rd tight end if I add them. So when I start to think of it that way and think about like the sheer overall ceiling of a lineup that I can build here, I do think adding another running back, some wide receivers that start but aren't necessarily being drafted highly, those guys have 15, 20, 25 fantasy point per week upside, not on average, but upside, whereas these tight ends don't really have that. So I may actually just leave that there and have to be comfortable with that 0 in week 13 at tight end because it's really a one-shot deal there. And I don't want to make too much of a big deal about that bye week discrepancy in week 13. I think I'm willing to embrace a little bit of variance there in chaos. Maybe I can find those median 6 points that I'm missing out on with a ton of spike weeks elsewhere and still have a really strong week 13. So that's something to consider. That's not completely impossible when you're drafting some of these combos together. All right. Jerome Ford, I'm concerned there. The Browns just signed another running back today, veteran Dwayne Washington. Might not seem like a big deal, but it's enough of a big deal to the Browns to add another member to their running back room. Do I think Dwayne Washington is going to be a high impact player in fantasy football? No, but I think the message the Browns are telling us there is that they're concerned about their depth. And so Jerome Ford, that's why he's kind of falling a little bit here. His ADP was about a round higher than this spot. So just something that we are watching there. And Jerome Ford will not be playing tomorrow night for Browns and Eagles. That's why we also have some pretty strong notes on Cleveland only having a handful of running backs that will play tomorrow night. Last week, just 3 played: Demetric Felton, John Kelly, and Hassan Hall. And based off of the trends that Kevin Stefanski's staff have had in preseason games, we expect these 3 guys to still have a ton of work in the game tomorrow night. I think Demetric Felton is a phenomenal play for some preseason fantasy football, for example. Just to put that out there into the universe. We'll have a video on the channel going over the top plays in the showdown game between the Browns and the Packers for you. We will have our top picks for that game for high and low risk contests and all the notes on the Browns and the Eagles, some of which I have shared with you throughout the show here this evening. So keep an eye out for that if that is something that you are interested in tomorrow evening. The Browns and the Eagles kicking off week 2 of the NFL preseason. Okay. Coming back around to me pretty quickly here. 2-5-6-2 build. I do think I have some good wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk, Michael Pittman, Jacoby Myers, and Michael Gallup, but I definitely want a couple more. How do we want to go about doing that here? Devontae Parker was definitely on my radar. He's been lighting it up in Patriot as much as one can light it up with Mac Jones at quarterback. He's been lighting it up in Patriots camp. So definitely a great late pick here. There's a couple of Chiefs wide receivers that are starting to get picked. One of them has already gone. The other one just came off the board. So these are some of the other high upside guys, Richie James and Justin Ross. People look for late. All right. Let's think about this here. Got my correlations with Mark Andrews. I do need to think about a Patriot with Josh Allen. I don't want to force it, but that's something that I am passively thinking about here. I kind of can't believe Chuba goes so low because I don't think Miles Sanders has like this tremendous stranglehold on the Panthers running back job. So he's one of my favorite super late running backs here. I got 6 running backs here. I do think it's a little high, probably as many as I want for this contest. And then one of my favorite late wide receivers is Paris Campbell with the New York Giants. I think he's in line to have one of the most productive seasons for the Giants at receiver. A little bit of a gadget player, kind of a Deebo Samuel light profile where they will use him out of the backfield a little bit. So Paris Campbell, someone I like here as well. No direct correlation on my roster, but just looking for upside here at the end of the contest. Really interesting build here, 2491 from Nomad and Worst. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Takes his second tight end in Tyler Conklin. I think 9 wide receivers is fine. I typically draw the line at 8. That's just something I do. But I think being in that 7 to 10 wide receiver range and that 4 to 6 running back range is probably the correct place to be. I think 2 to 3 quarterbacks. I tend to only draft 2 quarterbacks. 3 tight ends, 4 at the most is where I tend to net out on these teams. All right. One of the things I challenge you to try to do is draft a roster and try to talk about it while you're doing it. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but we pretty much got through that this evening. Not one of my favorite teams, not one of my least favorite teams either. I'm never going to hate a team when I have 2 high upside offenses that I'm building around at the quarterback position with Josh Allen here from the Bills, Anthony Richardson with the Indianapolis Colts. So feeling pretty good about deploying that on this team. And haven't had a ton of receivers go down here, but just in general for my overall portfolio of teams I put together, Mecole Hardman being one of my highest exposed wide receivers. I'm always happy to at least see him go here at the end because it just kind of serves as a little bit of confirmation bias for me that it's not just me that thinks he's one of the highest upside players available late. All right. So as we look to wrap things up, really appreciate everybody that dropped in and watched the stream for a little bit this evening. We're going to be back at some point this weekend with another best ball stream. I'm hopeful to have either Chuck or Brian back on the mend on the show with me to talk through some strategy on the channel. We're going to have preview videos every single day for some of the preseason slates. I know that's Brian's goal, whether those are pre-recorded videos on the channel or live streams. We will absolutely announce the schedule. So make sure that you're subscribed. You have the notification bell on because you will get notified as soon as a live show is scheduled to talk about preseason or a video comes out. So I know that's something a lot of you are looking for, and we hear you. We've heard that, and we'll make sure that we put that out for you every single day that there is a contest that you are thinking about entering, because I know that's what you people want to hear, is that we're going to make those for you. Isaiah Likely, Malik Davis, just trying to keep an eye on these last few players that come off the board to see if I can get exactly who I want with the very last pick of the draft. Okay. Hunter Henry was probably the only Patriot I was thinking about to correlate with Josh Allen and Dawson Knox. Kind of weird because it's 2 tight ends, and I already have Mark Andrews. So what's the likelihood that Mark Andrews is not going to play well enough, and then both Hunter Henry and Dawson Knox are going to score well enough to be my starting tight end and my flex play that week. So even though I liked Henry as a pick here, I wasn't going to make it because I just don't see him actually cracking my lineup. Whatever wide receiver I end up deciding to select here with the final pick, just by virtue of that alone, has much more of an opportunity to be one of my 3 highest scoring wide receivers in any given week. So that's just something that influences my thinking here with the final pick of the draft for my team. These are all very interesting selections late. Deion Jackson, definitely much more interesting now that Jonathan Taylor is not in Colts camp anymore. We'll see how long that lasts. But I definitely don't hate taking flyers on him or rookie Evan Hull out of Northwestern. They both should have an opportunity to prove their mettle a little bit here in the Colts offense. Anything happens with just Jonathan Taylor throughout the rest of the summer here, and things are not trending well for him. So definitely think that's worth identifying some opportunities with those Colts players on your rosters as a running back that you can use. I don't need one here. I need a receiver, and Tutu Atwell comes off the board. Okay, so who is the best one left that I actually think I want to roster? I don't know, man. All these guys are pretty gross. So I do think I'm going to go with a boring selection. Kendrick Bourne should still have a role with the Patriots. He should be a fringe third, fourth wide receiver that mixes in the slot. Not going to be a super exciting player, but that's to start the season. Maybe something changes throughout the season. Maybe he flat out outperforms guys like Parker or Demario Douglas, Tyquan Thornton, Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe there's some injuries to those players. And now I do have a bring back with Josh Allen with my last pick in the draft. I'm not ever usually considering a player like Kendrick Bourne on a roster like this, but we have a 2-6-8-2. I decided to go with 2 different quarterback stacks while also having Justin Jefferson on the roster at the number 1 pick. And so that's how we built the team this evening. We'll be back tomorrow with a video previewing Eagles and Browns Thursday Night Football for preseason week 2. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll talk to you soon.